Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Toronto International Film Festival Industry Conference. My name is Neil McPherson. I'm the Associate Programmer of the conference, and it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce the first of 4 Guardian TIFF talks that are taking place throughout the festival. These talks represent a new partnership with The Guardian and our industry conference, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be working with them. We'd like to thank them, and in particular Nigel Smith, who you'll meet in a moment, for all they've done in putting these fantastic events together. The next talk in the series will take place this Sunday afternoon, with a focus on Adam Leon's film Tramps. He will be here alongside cast members Callum Taylor, Grace Van Patten, and Mike Birbiglia. And next Wednesday afternoon, we have a double bill of Guardian TIFF talks with a focus on The Bad Batch, with director Anna Lily Amapur and cast member Suki Waterhouse, as well as look at Christine from director Antonio Campos, who will be joined by Rebecca Hall and writer Craig Shilowitz. But today's talk is on the remarkable film A United Kingdom, and I'd now like to introduce you to your host for today's talk from The Guardian, Nigel Smith.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. It means a lot. And I'd like to please welcome our guests, director Amma Asante and the star of the United Kingdom, David Oyelowo. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Now, when did you both land in Toronto? I'm guessing probably today or yesterday, right?
Yesterday for me.
Okay.
And me too.
And
Yesterday
you too.
from London, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to preface this talk with the fact that I have yet to see the film, which is rare for me, but I'm going to be seeing it today, shortly after. I think it premieres at 6:30 at Roy Thompson
That's right.
Hall. It's the big world premiere. No one's seen this film yet, but it's highly, highly anticipated for obvious reasons. What's going through both of your heads right now? You were last here with Belle, which was also a world premiere, I believe.
A couple years ago with Belle. Going through my head, I live on a mixture of anxiety and excitement,
Yeah.
basically. And some people say they're the same thing, just named differently. But it's kind of a combination of both. You spend all this time crafting something that is meant to have a conversation with the audience, and now that conversation's about to start, and the two things are equally happening within me at the moment.
And David?
Yeah, it's been a 6-year journey for me on this one, so it is definitely the culmination of all of that time, all of that effort, all of that desire and passion to see this story come to fruition. So I feel sick. Basically.
Okay, I hope we have bags on the side.
Yeah. I have some.
You have some in your suit? Smart. Well, let's talk about the 6-year journey, because I read in the press notes that you were, in fact, the first one attached to the project before Amma came on board, which I'm guessing is kind of a rarity in cases like this.
Kind of discovered the project with one of the producers. He can tell you more.
Yeah, in 2010, I was doing a film called 96 Minutes in Atlanta, and one of our producers on that film, Justin Moore-Louis, and his partner, Charlie Mason, had the rights to this book called The Calabar, which is written by Susan Williams, and it was basically the story of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams' love affair and marriage and their life together. And I remember him handing me the book, and this couple on the cover of the book, this very debonair young man and this beautiful woman, arm in arm, walking down a street, and I was completely intoxicated by the image. Clearly it was the 40s, and they just had this thing about them that I couldn't quite put my finger on, and I kind of became obsessed with the story as of then.
Was this a story either of you were even familiar with before coming across the source material?
I mean, when David called me to say, look, I have this passion project, I've been working on it for a few years, I think you're the right person to direct it. Will you please have a look at the material, which involved a photo essay of the real couple, as well as a script at that time. And there was also Susan Williams' really brilliant book. The first thing he said to me is, look, Amma, I didn't know anything about this couple existing until I was given the book. He then, gave me a sort of outline of their life and this story. I had not heard anything, and I mean, I think one of the key things. This is a love story. The movie is a love story, and it's the story of a couple. It's a couple's fight to be together. But what's really interesting is it's also a story of one African country's journey towards independence. And it's a subject matter that fascinates me because my parents, who are Ghanaian, so of Ghana, West Africa, grew up as children of a colony, and in their 20s saw it become an independent country. Yeah. And it was the first sub-Saharan African country to do so. So I was madly interested in this subject matter and had not heard of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams. So, 10 years ago, I would have felt really bad about that. Actually, when David called me, I was so excited that I didn't know about this, because we are now in a place where financiers are no longer saying to you, well, we can't make that film because nobody's ever heard of them. Now we're at a place where if you've never heard of somebody or people who have done something extraordinary, this is the time to tell their story. This is the time to bring it to an audience.
Yeah. And about your own personal history that you just brought up, how did that factor into your envisioning of this film?
Massively, heavily. Yeah. I mean, David will tell you that one of the things I really wanted to do when I first came on board was ensure that his internal journey, Seretse's internal journey towards... because what the story becomes, in a way, a balance or a decision for Seretse to decide whether to kind of keep up the traditions of his country in one particular aspect in terms of the royal family, or whether to turn it into a democracy that, will vote for its leader in a different way. And I wanted that to be an internal journey for Seretse, to kind of carve an arc for him where he starts off as not a boy, definitely a man, but both he and Rosamund Pike's character Ruth have a growth in the story, because it's a rites of passage. It's a grown-up rites of passage in many ways, and so it played massively. The fact that both David and I are African British children. We're both children of, parents who were born in Africa. We both have an intimate relationship with Africa, but we were born in Britain. So I call it bicultural in many ways. Those two cultures are entwined within us. And so these were the two continents, Europe and Africa, that are responsible for raising me. And I desperately wanted to see that reflected in our finished film.
Yeah. Now, David, growing up in Britain, I'm guessing that you watched a lot of Merchant Ivory growing up, maybe some Jane Austen TV adaptations.
You know you did.
But you often don't see a black person in those projects. Was it a thrill to make a period film featuring a black protagonist?
Well, in all honesty, it was one of the primary motivations for doing the film, as you say, and as you well know. That's one of our big imports, is a good period drama, whether it's, Merchant Ivory films or Jane Austen or Dickens, or, we make those very well. But, the growing up in the 70s and 80s in the UK and 90s, when, a lot of those films were having their heyday, we would watch avidly and never saw ourselves represented. And to be perfectly honest, when I was younger, it was just a given. Okay, I'm not there represented, but I love watching these movies. I'm force-fed, spoon-fed, them, because they're on the TV all the time. But as I got older, as my education broadened beyond basic education, where they don't teach about the fact that black people have been part of British culture for centuries, and impacted British culture in very major ways, not least because of Britain's colonialist history. And so when I discovered this story, it came at a time for me where I had done a a number of films, or some films set in Africa. I did a film called Last King of Scotland, which was set in Uganda, and I'd seen other films like Hotel Rwanda, Constant Gardener, Blood Diamond. These are films about the continent, but they were often being told through the eyes of white protagonists, and they were often about the darker side of things, which of course is true. I loved being in The Last King of Scotland, and a film about Idi Amin. You're not going to sanitize that and make him out to be Mother Teresa. But I didn't see the balance, and yet I had lived the balance. I had lived in Nigeria for 7 years, from the age of 6 to 13, and known that we fall in love. We are jovial. We are not all poverty-stricken, certainly not all child soldiers, and I don't know any dictators. So, for me personally, I was so elated to find a story that reflects that. An African king who falls in love. These are things that universally we are drawn to, those kind of fantastical stories about kings or princes falling in love. And then love is something, hopefully, if you've lived a decent life, is something that will have intersected with your life. And so those were all things that the combination of not seeing those images when I was younger, discovering this story, and creeping into an era where Amma Asante exists, where I had been given opportunities that meant that we could fight for this story to be told, all led to us being here with you right now.
Yeah. Now, another film that finds that balance that you were just speaking of is your last film, Belle, in many ways, which featured a biracial protagonist and was another period film.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that comes from precisely the history that David has just described, where, we kind of sat and watched these films through kind of misty glass, with our hands pressed to the window, thinking, where are we? As young women, I have always said I'm an unashamed romantic. I loved those stories. I loved, every version of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility that you've ever seen, adapted, all of those adaptations, but we weren't in there. And yet there was another interesting factor in all of this for me, which is that there was a whole world that was financing the world that Austen sits on, and that period dramas sit on, and I wondered where the intersection was between these worlds. The world of the slave trade and the world of the sort of middle class to privileged households. Where do those two things meet? And in that painting, which Belle is based on, called Belle and Bet, where you see this privileged woman of color wearing an amazing silk dress and pearls, and standing next to her white counterpart who clearly loves her. I saw that intersection once again of art and politics, and clearly whoever had commissioned the painting loved her. So there was love involved. Whoever commissioned the painting was courageous, because there was courage involved in creating a painting that had a black character who was not an accessory, but was a clear protagonist, if you like, in the painting. Those things have all, for me, this was a movie that I had to make in the same way that I had to make this one. We're at a time where at the moment there are small cracks that are allowing us to break some of these stereotypes. Those stereotypes that David has just talked about that say that we did not exist. In the history books that tell us about our British story, and yet we did. We know we did, and we did in a positive way. And as David says, what thrilled me when I looked at the photo essay that David sent me was seeing a world where black men were walking through the streets of London in 1947, wearing their trilbies and their, their raincoats, and, they were there to not, simply have an education, but complete an education that had already started in Africa. This was just about learning about, other parts of the world, and specifically a part of the world that was controlling Seretse's country at the time. So it was about completing an education so that he could go back and best represent his people. to those British powers that be. And I found that thrilling because I remember photographs of my dad, probably a decade later, in the late 50s, you know, with the sharp suits on, you know, with his educated pals, you know, with my big brother as a small boy amongst that group of grown men. And it was a world that we never see depicted on television or the big screen, and yet I knew it existed. I knew from those images that I had. And so this was, I mean, David will tell you every day I commented on his suit, I commented on his waistcoat, I commented on the colour of his trilbies, you know, because I was getting great pleasure from the idea of being able to express that point where my London met my Africa, you know?
How powerful was it to therefore shoot in location? I read that you actually shot where everything occurred, correct?
Yes, and there is a moment in the film where you'll see Rosamund Pike playing Ruth, giving birth to Ruth and Seretse child, and that actually was shot in the very hospital where Seretse was born. You can tell them about the house that we shot in.
Yeah, you know, I've been a great beneficiary of this. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I've done a few films where you get to shoot in the place events took place, and you know, I felt that palpably on a film I did called Selma, where we were on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and where people actually marched 50 years prior. And this, with this film, 70 years prior, the very house that Ruth and Seretse first lived in was sat there, decaying, ignored, surrounded by bushes, and we cleared it out, cleaned it up, restored it, and shot those scenes in that place. And, you know, people often ask what research you do when you're playing these true-life characters. No, there is just no substitute to energetically being in the places they inhabited. You just need to just plug in to something primal, something alchemic, you know, that's going on in that environment. And I know Rosamund and I felt that very keenly, you know, not only in the hospital scene, but being in the very house they lived in. Their family members, you know, are still there. Up until very recently, his sister was still alive, and a lady who is depicted in the film by Terry Fetto, she just passed away a few months ago. Muriel, who is played by Laura Carmichael, passed away, I think, just before we started shooting.
She did, yeah.
And the writer, Guy Hibbert, had time with both. And so all of that, you know, just, it works its way into the film and is invaluable.
I don't think I've ever heard of that being done, shooting inside the house where the actual story took place.
Yeah,
that's remarkable.
I mean, it was an incredible privilege to be able to do that in so many ways. And as David says, you know, just the house alone speaks to the couple.
Yeah.
It tells you a little bit about who they were, and, you know, your home is a very intimate thing. It represents who you are. So it was, you know, for us to have had to make it up, we couldn't have quite, I don't think, got the same authenticity as we ended up with, you know. And then in London, you know, we shot in the Houses of Parliament where the debates about Ruth and Seretse really took place. You know, so just ensuring that we had these real life living places, or in the house, in terms of the house, a place that we had to bring back to life was very important.
Yeah. And one person we have missing from the talk is
Rosamund Pike.
Rosamund Pike,
Yes.
sorry, of course.
Yes.
Gone Girl. Now she plays Ruth in the film,
Yeah.
your wife. Now, how did she come to be cast? Because a film like this is obviously so reliant upon the chemistry of its two leads. How did that all go down?
Well, Rosamund had worked with David before.
Yeah.
They had brilliantly worked together on a film called Jack Reacher. And so shortly after David you know, sent me the materials around this passion project, we obviously started talking about who we thought this woman could be. And I've always thought that Rosamund, of course, we had just finished Gone Girl, but prior to that, Rosamund has this quiet energy that I've always admired and always had a great respect for. And when I say prior to Gone Girl, that's because I think it was a louder energy in Gone Girl, which was equally as brilliant, but you know, I hadn't seen it until that point.
Yeah.
So we all talked, and she was first on the list, and David knew her, so it was it made sense that he should be the one to send her the same materials that he sent me, the script, the photo essay, and you can describe her reaction.
Yeah, I mean, I had, as Amma says, worked with her on Jack Reacher and been an admirer of her work. But you know, when chemistry is a big part of what is necessitous for a film to work, it is a gamble. You just don't know if it's going to work. But when I sent her the photographs of Ruth and Suretse, within about an hour or two, I got an email back, and she was trembling with tears and said, "I don't know who these people are, but they have had this visceral effect on me. Tell me more." You know, the actor in me, of course, is going, "Oh." The producer in me is going, "Yes, yes." And so thankfully she read the script that we'd been working on for a while, and that feeling continued, and that for me is what encouraged me that this chemistry will probably work, because it was having the effect on her that it had had on me, and the same passion to have the story told. We saw the same things in the story. And then when we all got together, that just continued. I mean, so much of this film was born out of a very real desire to see love, which is such a powerful force of nature, be represented accurately and with as much vivacity as possible, and we fought that battle every day.
Now, I hate to bring this up, but you don't premiere a film at Toronto with the word Oscar coming up.
What does that mean?
Eye rolls, exactly.
Who's Oscar?
Who's Oscar?
Who is?
Oscars, Academy Awards. Now, you've been such a wonderfully outspoken advocate for the African American community. Last year, speaking about, you know, the fact that no actors of color were nominated for a second year in a row for any Oscars. What do you make of the Academy's recent decisions to overhaul the Academy voting base?
I think what happened in the wake of that is that everyone got to the point where I think we can all safely agree that there are certain inequities that exist around female directors, around representations of people of color, sexual orientation, people with disabilities. You know, it's skewed. And I think we're all agreed that that's not just a fable. We're not playing the race card. We're not playing the, you know, it's reality. Enough studies have been done. And for me, I applaud any institution, any individual who is going to segue from talking about it to doing it. And so you know, I commend the Academy personally for the fact that they are making changes, and for me as an individual, this film is a representation of trying to do that as an individual. You know, I very keenly wanted a woman to direct this film. You know, I know the power of what happens when a person who is the protagonist of the film is reflected by the person who is behind the camera, and the authenticity that comes from that. So, like I said earlier, so often African stories have been told through the eyes of those who are from without, as opposed to those from within. And that doesn't discredit those films. It's just, it's a different point of view.
It's a skewed point of view. It means that we only see those stories from a particular what is now called default point of view. Exactly, and that's the same thing with female directors. I just feel like if God in his divine plan made it that pretty much the population is 50-50, men and women, why it should be below 10% of women behind the screen when we have this cultural medium that is so influential, so impacting, so educational, so inspiring. Why the female voice is actively, intentionally being dumbed down and marginalized, it's absolutely inexcusable. And so, you know, for me personally,
we are all the richer when we decide, you know what, not on my watch. So I can only speak for myself as an individual, and I am going to the day I die, be an advocate for the D word, diversity, and I applaud any and every institution that does the same.
Yeah, well, bravo, thank you. And I'm just curious, was it working with Ava DuVernay on Selma that really gave you that perspective? Or did you have that before working?
That was one of the, it was one of the moments for me where I turned a corner. Ava and I had done a film called Middle of Nowhere before we did Selma. And I had watched the evolution of Selma. I first read that script in 2007. And the evolution of that film, there were 5 directors involved with it over the course of those 7 years. The first 2 were white men. The next 2 were black men. And then I fought very hard for Ava DuVernay to be the director eventually. And the reason it took so long is every time we tried to get the film made, they kept telling us, is there a black audience for this? Is there an audience for... We're talking about Dr. King, by the way. The only American with a holiday named after him in the 20th century. And there were all these bizarre excuses for not making the movie. But that aside, in terms of what the film became, in 2007, that was a film about Lyndon Johnson. Dr. King was a peripheral character. And as it went from white men to black men, it became more about Dr. King. As it went from black men to a black woman, it became about a man, the women, and the movement. And I literally watched how perspective, on the basis of your cultural bias, your racial, because we all have bias. We are all the center of our own story, and that's what we want to see reflected on screen. So to see this black woman, talented black woman, bring up Annie Lee Cooper as played by Oprah Winfrey. The conversation between Dr. King and Coretta in the film was a phone call. They never met in earlier iterations of the script. It became one of the central emotional thrusts of the film. Without that storyline in that movie, you don't get to see the emotional topography of Dr. King. All you see is the politics. So this is what we're being robbed of by having just one perspective. The richness and the layers and the depth that we live, that we therefore project onto the screen, that then speak to an audience that reflects the reality that we live every day. So Ava on that film definitely was the moment something I knew to be true was manifested in reality, and it was the point beyond which I went on a run of 4 female directors in a row. It was Ava, then Maris Curran on 5 Nights in Maine, then Amma on the United Kingdom, then Mira Naya on Queen of Cartway. And I am the richer as an artist for that journey with these women.
And you know what? As our industry has to be, as you know, I've always said when you're walking to your local movie theatre on a Saturday night, what I aim for as a filmmaker is that you have as much choice as possible when you look up on those screens and you're deciding what film you're going to see on a Saturday night. You know, 5 movies about a very similar default experience doesn't serve you in any way. It doesn't serve the industry in any way. And there is no industry that can rely on the same blood pumping around or the same water pumping through it over and over again if it wants to move forward.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Okay, we're going to open it up to the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And there are folks on either end.
You're all so pretty.
Also pretty. Yes, the woman in the 4th row with her hand up in the middle.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm hoping I'll be able to get a ticket tonight. I know there's a huge demand. I'm British African as well. I'm Ade Sri Lanka. I've always been really focused on telling diaspora stories. So when you say that the cracks, I think that was the term you used just now, that you feel that there's this slight difference. In what sense do you think we as co-productions are getting that sense of possibility, or the opportunity and the potential of those stories are being seen in the institutions beyond just I don't know, maybe I think the BFI has supported this, hasn't it?
Yes.
So in terms of
yes.
maybe some of the other people and maybe the private sector's interest in investing in those stories. What's your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, that's changing in itself. I mean, a movie, for instance, like Belle, that was deemed before it came out to possibly, A, because it was a costume drama, that it might only attract women, then B, because the lead character was black, that it may only attract a black audience. You know, nobody knew what its level of crossover might be, and you are constantly being judged on the last film that was like the film that they think you're making, or the last film that you've made. And so when we have movies like Selma, we have movies like The Butler, we have movies like Belle, we have movies that do well, you know, essentially money people, not money men, but money men and women are interested in the business. And if your product sells, they will invest money in it. The question is, you know, when we strip it back, what allows a project to sell? Will they put the money into the marketing? Will they put money into the poster campaign? Will they put the money into advertising? You know, there are very good studies that show that films by women do, you know, fundamentally better oftentimes than many films by men, but they have fundamentally less marketing support. So how do you create a sort of level playing field so that you can really measure when a movie that's directed by a black female, that has a black male or black female protagonist, how do you measure when it's doing well in order to attract financing from the public sector or the private sector, as you say? I am certainly seeing, as I go forward into my next project, that there is interest from the private sector. I'm certainly seeing that, because, you know, it's one thing for me to be a black female who is seeing a story through my gaze, but if all of the people that are going to be making the decisions about financing are people that don't understand the story through my gaze, there's not a lot I can do, because there's so many hurdles I have to cross. I have to get through the script barrier, then the shooting barrier, then the editing barrier, and then how will we market this barrier? So I'm seeing changes in terms of, you know, in certain institutions, you're seeing the fact that black women are being placed in areas of responsibility that certainly was not the case 10 years ago. I'm seeing the fact that, you know, when we're selling these movies and marketing these movies, there's a more diverse group of people making the decisions about how these movies are going to be marketed. And that's essential. That's really important. I'm always happy when I see a mixed group of people making a decision on what my post is going to look like. I'm really not interested in what background they come from. I just love the fact that they may be different to what we normally see. And the reason why I say cracks is because we don't ever want to be a fad. We don't ever want to be a fashion. We don't ever want to be a moment that disappears and then raises its head, you know, in 5 years' time. We want to get to a place where we keep up the momentum, so much so that we cross that river literally over to the other side and we can never go back. And, you know, we're still halfway across the river. We're not there yet, but certainly some of the films that we've talked about today have gotten us to step into the water, and that's an important thing.
Yeah, in the front row. Oh, we're sorry. Okay. So just wait till the mic comes around, please.
It's coming. Yeah.
Thank you. I've seen these films that you've been in and that you've directed. I've seen Belle, and I'm looking forward to United Kingdom, and I've seen many films that David's been in. Could you tell me about your training? You're both from London, and you both have experiences in how did you get started, and what did you do in London to get started?
Well, I'm just going to say that we both come from very different backgrounds in terms of training, one formal and one informal. So I'll let David go with his background.
I'm the formal.
You would never have guessed, right?
No, I trained at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts for 3 years, and then I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company after that. You know, it's worth noting that in the UK, the theatrical tradition tends to be the foundation for us as actors, and I can't recommend that enough if you're considering a career as an actor, because, you know, when you stand before an audience night after night, especially if you get to do some of the best stuff ever written in the shape of Shakespeare or Greek tragedy or or whatever, which is part of our training, the audience tells you every night if you are telling them the truth by their reaction moment to moment. And there is no training that can touch that, really. And it bakes itself into your being, into your ability to access humanity. And you have had a conversation with an audience live that then, if you can transition to film, the very technical form that film is, and you still have that sort of bubbling in the background of your mind, of your body, means that you can still translate that level of truth despite cameras and microphones and all that stuff that is sort of contriving to take you away from the truth. So that was my training, and it's invaluable. I haven't done a play for 10 years now, and I'm just about to go back and do one in New York, and I can't wait. I'm terrified, but I also can't wait, because it's really where, for me as an actor, you go to juice up in order to keep this thing going.
I love how the way he says, one in New York.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, it is.
it's a big one. It's a very important one. I had a really informal training and entry into the industry. I started as a child actress, a really bad one. But that was a really good thing, because what I was able to really see and understand was what a good performance looked like. I saw, that my fellow actors around me were absolutely brilliant. And it meant that I could be very honest with myself and know that I wanted to remain in a world where I could continue telling stories, but that they should not be channeled through me as the person on screen or on stage. That was a bad idea. So I started writing. And primarily that's how my stories come to me. I love discovering character through being solitary and having that relationship with them on the page first. And I was very lucky. The reason why David and I have known each other for 18 years is because one of the first things that I wrote for, one of the first TV series that I had on for with BBC Television was a series I had written and was producing, and David was not long out of drama school, and he was a lead character and started in the second series. And we were both, I think, pretty young, 4, 5 years old, maybe
3,
at the
3.
time.
I think we were 3.
And so my experience has been informal, but literally experience-based. In David's conversation about or explanation about coming in front of an audience and getting the response from them every single night when you're doing a piece of theatre, in a way is very similar when you're struggling to tell your stories on screen, because if they don't work, you don't get financed the next time. And so it's about making sure that you keep up a strong connection to audiences who will come back and are hungry for your brand of work, really.
Yeah. Always as good as your last film is the same.
Only
right?
as good as your last film as well. Yes.
Sorry, right there, yeah.
Hi, David, Amma.
Hi.
Just wanted to say, my name is Cameron Scott, I'm 21 years old, I'm from South Africa. And I just wanted to congratulate you guys on being such pioneers in your field. I remember being in grade 10 in a history class learning about Martin Luther King's movement and the Selma march that happened, and thinking to myself, like, as an actor at that stage, like, why hasn't this been produced? Why hasn't these stories been told? And I have such a deep respect for both of you in your individual fields of how you advancing that, and at the same way you're doing it in a way that is not aggressive and is not accusatory, and you're doing it in a way that is not hurting anybody's ego or opinion, and I really, really commend you guys on it. But my question was, as these pioneers, that you guys are negating waters that are of hidden stories that haven't been told, how do you begin to even start on them? Do the characters justice that is honest and true without over-glorifying it, because there's such a tendency, because they're so hidden, we don't know about them, so you don't want to lift it up to a standard that isn't there, you want it to be true. How do you guys just go forward and select the projects that you do, and what's next?
Truth comes from humanity, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, we make films that we would want to see, that reflect the lives we lead. As artists, we see where there is a dearth of a certain kind of story. Often that dearth exists within what we look like and who we are and what our experiences are. But, I'm glad to hear that you were taught about Seretse Khama in South Africa, because the truth of the matter is, between both Selma and this film, yes, we shot those two films, for me, in the places they were set. But I remember being at a screening for Selma in Selma, and at the end of the film, a white lady stood up at the back, and Selma is a tiny place. And she said, "Thank you so much for this film, because I knew nothing about it. We weren't taught this in school. I didn't know that happened on that bridge. I didn't know that this place's history." The same thing happened in Botswana. I was picked up at the airport with my assistant, who's a black lady. And as you know, the film is an interracial love story. And the driver who picked it up turned to Melanie, my black assistant, and said, "Oh, so are you playing Ruth?" And
David, do that accent again.
"Are you playing Ruth?" Little taster of what's going to happen tonight on the screen.
I know. Teasing. Teasing.
But I thought, he's got to be kidding me. But what they are taught at school in Botswana is David Livingstone, the white explorer. They don't really know about Seretse Khama, the father of their nation. So the answer to your question is that as artists, our primary function is not to be educators, but we are at a time in history where, for us, our history, who we are, needs to give context for stories that we hope to tell down the road, which is...
Right? And so the history, the foundation, our history has to be laid first.
Yeah.
I think one of the key things, sorry to interrupt, David, is that quite often before we can be allowed to tell all of the fictional stories that we'd like to tell, we first have to show our historical context. Because with a story like Belle, for instance, the first thing that I saw on IMDb before the film came out was there were no black aristocrats in England. That didn't exist. So we're not even believed when it happened. We can't even begin to tell fictional stories in the way that default movies do until we can show who we truly were and have been in the past. So I just wanted to concur with that, David.
And that's and look, I'm can't wait to do my Hunger Games. I can't wait to do my. Do you know what I mean?
Or a film about a woman who designs a Hoover. I said the other day, I'd like to do a film about a black woman who designs a Hoover. I want to take that to the financiers and see what they say to me.
Absolutely, but we have to do Dr. King first, unfortunately.
And with that, unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. But thank you.
So he's had his hand up. Could we just have one from that guy?
He's black, so don't
he's
discriminate.
Black, and he's been struggling to get a voice.
We're talking equality here, people.
I'm being told we can do one more.
Okay, just the one, and he's going to keep it quick, and we're going to keep it quick. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Rodney Charles. I'm the Vice President of the African Artists Association in Los Angeles.
Hola.
I wanted to just ask you something very quickly, which is about the situation. We had a panel earlier about Brexit, and I wondered whether or not, as a result of Brexit, that you felt that there might be a bit of a constriction as far as the diversity initiatives that have started slowly coming into play in Europe and specifically in Britain because of that, we've seen some very xenophobic lashbacks, for example. So whether or not we can expect that there might be a shift. Additionally, also, I was very curious to know what your experiences both have been as far as the African continent and the response to your work, and ultimately where you'd like to see cinema evolve to on the continent.
Well, I'm really regretting giving the
Yeah,
black
that's a
brother.
big question.
I know, because it's like, what is this? Okay, I'm going to answer the first part really quickly. I'm going to let you do the second part. I mean, Brexit has polarized the UK. Yes, you may say that you felt a sense of xenophobia. I think that artists who have benefited from being able to connect, whether it's financially, artistically, creatively, with other worlds, are going to push even harder to do that. I, for one, as an artist, will do that. I think that will have a massive impact. David, you can take it from
With
there.
relish. No, look, the thing about Brexit and some of what's going on in the USA right now, there's clearly a nationalistic uprising, without being too dramatic, that is taking place. And for whatever reason people are voting the way they are voting, an element of it is a pushback against diversity that is within cultures. This is a tide that is unstoppable, people.
Death throes.
Do you know what I mean?
Death throes. Those people who are making the loudest noise, it's because they're in the death throes. Their way of life, in that sense, in terms of diversity,
I think so.
stopping it is coming to an end.
I think so. And so we are going to be a mixed people. We are going to see this thing happen, this utopian ideal. And, you know, so we're just going to keep on fighting. Like I said earlier about the whole diversity thing, you can talk about it or you can do it. I think in your life, just do it.
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you so much, you two. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was the last of today's